Hi, my name is Dr. David Campt. I'm with the Dialogue Company and the Voice Project, and I'm so grateful that y'all are joining us for this hour-long discussion about engaging with compassion, a discussion about the 2020 election and what we might do to engage with compassion. So I'll introduce my partner in this, or have her introduce herself. And so Karin, say who you are.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Karin Tamerius. I'm the founder of Smart Politics. I'm trained in both psychiatry and political psychology, and I spend my time teaching people how to talk about politics in a more productive and persuasive way. Really excited to be here today.
Great. So my name is Dr. David Campt. I'm head of the Dialogue Company and a project called the White Ally Toolkit, as well as a project called the Voice Project, which stands for Voters Organized to Influence Critical Elections. And this series that we're doing, this is the first of 7 sessions that Karin and I are doing each Monday at 12:30 that are, excuse me, about how to reach voters in the 2020 election. We'll say more about what reach means, but our purpose is to try to give you skills for how you can be more impactful and persuasive among people you know to affect the election. So this particular session, this is the first of 7. This one will be an hour. The others will be a half hour. This session today is on mobilizing non-voters. That's the topic of the first 3 sessions. And today we're going to talk about engaging with compassion. Let me say a little bit about the agenda for today. So we're going to make a couple of comments about the significance of the 2020 election, although I think y'all know that. Then we have a few comments to make about dialogue, persuasion, and what we know from science and how those things all interrelate. We're going to talk about different types of canvassing. Karen's going to talk about that. We'll be talking about different engagement strategies for different types of people. I will do a little explanation of the reach method, and then we'll take some questions. So that's our overall flow. So, Karin, what do you think that people need to hear, just briefly, about the significance of this election?
Well, I think most people already know, David, that this is an incredibly important election, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. And the real question that's confronting people is what to do about it. I think a lot of people out there are feeling like they want to make a difference, but they just don't know how.
I think that's very true. And here's what's great about this opportunity. On the one hand, we are an extremely divided nation. I'm going to talk about the polarization in a minute. But what is also true is that in this very divided time, it turns out that the best way to be persuasive to people is to engage in strategies that are based on compassion, empathy, and listening. We're going to talk about that extensively. And at the same time, here's what's important to remember. No matter what happens in this election, no matter who wins, we're going to be an even more divided nation than before. So we will need an army of people who know how to engage across the divide with some compassion and empathy. That's going to be vital for our democracy and society not to fall apart. So there's an overlap between the strategies that you need to learn how to do and start doing that's going to help you determine the outcome of the election, as well as what we all need to prepare ourselves for so we can deal with the outcome and the inevitable rifts that happen. So we're doing this project, this work over the next several weeks to try to upgrade people's skills so they can influence the election, but we're also preparing for the inevitable divisions after the election. Okay, so I'm going to say a little bit about polarization and what we know about that. So one of the things that is an interesting truth is that there's a super majority of people who think that political polarization is an important problem for the nation. The polling data varies between 81% and 90% of Americans think that. So Americans, left, right, and center, Republican, Democrat, et cetera, we all think that political polarization is a really important problem. So I guess we're united about being divided. So I guess maybe that's a good thing. But when we drill down, we can see a bunch of very disturbing statistics about that. So For example, we don't like how each other think. Like, you can see that 52% of Republicans think the Democrats are more closed-minded than other Americans, and that goes up to 70% of Democrats think the Republicans are more closed-minded than other Americans. So we don't like how each other thinks. Also, we're frightened of each other. We can see that the percentage of Americans who are afraid of the other party, Republicans 62%, Democrats 70%. So I just want everybody, no matter who you are, to remember, many people on the other side are afraid of you. Now, this wasn't always true. We need to heal that, and I think we can heal that by having more conversations across that divide that are infused with compassion. It's so bad that we don't even want people to love somebody that we love. There was some polling data done in 1958 that tells us that about 34% of both Republicans and Democrats would be upset if the daughter married someone from another party. That's how the polling was done. When they updated this polling in 2016, they asked sons and daughters, but on the daughters, 61% of Republicans and Democrats didn't want their daughters to marry someone of a different party. Now, that is a huge change and not one that's good. We don't want, even if somebody loves our beloved family members, we don't want them in our family. We become that polarized. I think that's unfortunate, and we need to figure out how to deal with that. So not only do we not want people in our own family, we don't want them in our own neighborhood. So look at the percentage of folks who say it'll be hard to get along with somebody, with a new person in the neighborhood, they're from another party. Republicans say that. 27% of Republicans say that. 31% of Democrats say that. So we don't want people in our families. We don't want them even in our neighborhoods. So now, in addition to that, that's just an opinion thing. There's also some behavioral factors that are unfortunate that we have to recognize. 50% of Americans say they have ended a friendship or a relationship with someone because they were uncivil. And moreover, 43% said that they themselves have been uncivil. So part of what we need to figure out how to fix is this level of anxiety, frustration, distaste for the other side. We don't want them in our neighborhoods, in our families, and we don't think they deserve basic civil behavior, and we're willing to act out because of that. We need to shift that. And so Karin and I hope that we can be forces for pushing out methods so that we can talk about politics and not fall into uncivil behavior and not continue to think that the other side is somebody worth being afraid of. A big factor in where we are now is what might be called tribalism. Many authors have written about the fact that politics has become too much of a us and them, a team type of thing, where essentially we have our tribe on our side and we don't like people on the other tribe. It doesn't matter what they believe. We just, if they're in the other group, we don't like them. And that is not good for the future of democracy. We need to figure out how to turn that around. Now, part of the way we turn that around is talking to each other differently. So part of what we're talking about in this course is the way we talk to each other. And the big shift that we want to make sure that y'all get, and that we will come back to repeatedly, is we need to shift from trying to move people when we talk about politics from talking about facts, what we do now, to talking in a different way. And one of the reasons we need to do that is because of a factor in human cognition called the backfire effect. And essentially, the backfire effect, when you're trying to talk to people and persuade them, basically it goes like this. For the vast majority of people, super majority of people, if you're trying to persuade somebody about a belief that they deeply hold and you try to use facts, the overwhelming majority of the time, what happens is they just double down on their beliefs. Your facts basically fire them up to more deeply believe what they already believe. Essentially, it backfires. So what we got to think about is, given this is a common factor in human cognition, and it is true an overwhelming percentage of the time, first of all, we got to ask ourselves why we keep doing that. But the good news is that people have studied how to do something different to be more persuasive. And that's what we're going to be talking about each of these Mondays. and I'll be talking about some online materials that the Voice Project will further reinforce that there's different ways of talking. What we want to do is to think about how do we talk to each other in ways that don't fire up our tribalism and don't invoke the backfire effect, and play on things that are actually helpful. One of those things that's helpful in human cognition is something called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are a part of our brain that basically, when we engage with somebody else and we feel identified with them, there's a part of our brain that wants to mimic the state of mind that we think the other person is in. It's almost like a circuit gets created if we feel identified with somebody. And so we want our brain to be like their brain. This is why when we watch movies and something happens to people, we might cry or laugh or feel sad or identify, right? Because we're doing that identification thing, even with an image on the screen. This, of course, happens with people. This is why, like my cry response is very tuned up. Somebody starts crying, and I'll start turning up. I don't even know what they're crying about, right? So that, and you've probably seen that in laughter. You've seen that in yawning. That's a common factor in human interaction. So what we want to do is to figure out how to manage our interactions to leverage the fact that the backfire effect exists. One of the ways we do that is through shifting our strategy of interaction from facts to stories. Stories are a much more powerful way of trying to convey our point to somebody. You can see from the screen, stories create community, enable us to see through the eyes of other people, and open us to the claims of others. So what we're going to talk about is how we're better off trying to persuade somebody using stories, but we're also better off in creating more connections through stories. That's an important thing to do. So in a little while, I'm going to talk about a method that the Voice Project teaches about all of this and how to be persuasive using stories. So, and we will be reinforcing this over the course of the weeks of this course. So I want to shift to Karin now. She's going to talk a little about an approach, but Karin, did you have before you do that, do you have any other comments you want to add about the polarization thing?
Yeah, I think one of the things that gets lost often in our understanding of polarization is kind of the conventional wisdom around polarization, is that Americans have gotten farther apart in our political beliefs, that conservatives believe one thing and liberals believe another, and there's just no overlap there. And in reality, that hasn't happened. If you look at polling over the last 40, 50 years, the distribution of attitudes hasn't shifted a whole lot. Overall, the public opinion has shifted slightly to the left, but everybody is still very much in the center. There's a tremendous amount of overlap there. So what polarization is not an ideological polarization. It's not because we think about the world in very different ways. Rather, polarization that is problematic now is what we political psychologists call affective polarization. It is a polarization of emotion and feelings. So even though we don't think that differently from one another, we feel very differently about each other. And that is the real problem. And we have to learn how to see each other as being on the same team, not different teams.
Gotcha.
But so shall I go ahead and get started with
I think this would be a great time for that.
My presentation?
Sure.
Excellent. So folks, I'm going to be talking about a form of canvassing today that you probably haven't heard about. Sometimes it's called relational organizing. I prefer the term friends and family canvassing because I think it's a little more self-explanatory. And this is really what David and I are hoping you will do. So as a quick overview, what I'm going to address in the next 10 minutes or so is first, what is friends and family canvassing? Second, why is it the best form of canvassing? Third, what is the first thing you need to do this form of canvassing, and in particular, the 2 questions you need to ask every voter you know, and finally, how to use those questions and the data you collect prioritize your canvassing efforts. So a lot of you may have heard about the campaign of Pete Buttigieg, whether you are a Republican or a Democrat. This is an extraordinary story. Pete Buttigieg he was a mayor of a very small town in the Midwest. He had zero name recognition. And on top of all of that, he was married to a same-sex partner. And despite all of those factors, he was able to win the Iowa caucus in the Democratic Party. So the question becomes, how in the world did Pete Buttigieg come from behind in that way to win the Iowa caucus? And the answer is that he did something called organized outreach or friends and family canvassing to people that his supporters knew. So instead of going out and talking to strangers, they reached out to their family, they reached out to their friends, they reached out to their neighbors, they reached out to their people at work that they knew and talked about Pete Buttigieg's campaign. And that was a novel approach that made all the difference. So why did it work? Well, one of the things we don't normally realize is how many people we actually know. When you start to look at how extensive your network is, the average person has 150 stable relationships. These are relationships with people who might be very close to you, or they might just be people that you see at a party a few times a year. But in general, they are people who already know and like you. And that's what really makes this kind of canvassing more powerful than any other kind of canvassing out there. Because in other forms of canvassing, you're talking to strangers. But in friends and family canvassing, you're talking to people who trust you. And that gives you a leg up in every conversation. So I want to run you through quickly a couple of stories that will help you understand why this method is so powerful. So first, I want you to consider John. John does traditional phone banking because he spends 3 hours a day making telephone calls because he really wants to make a difference for his candidate. Like you, he's very concerned about the outcome of this election. And during that time, he manages to contact about 30 people. He gets a lot of hangups, but he finally gets to 30 people moving at a really swift clip. All of these people are strangers. And in that time, he shifts about one person to being more likely to vote. Now, this isn't persuading someone to change their vote. This is just making sure that one person actually gets to the polls who might otherwise not. After making calls, John is exhausted. It is exhausting to do that kind of telephone work. And he's often discouraged because he's had a lot of interactions that weren't particularly positive. I know in 2016, when I was doing this kind of work, I had a lot of people call me names and call my candidate names, and it was not a pleasant experience. But he still was able to turn out one additional vote. So even though he's discouraged and exhausted, he is making a little bit of a difference. Now I want you to meet Jen. Jen does deep canvassing by phone. Deep canvassing is different from traditional phone banking because your goal isn't to contact as many people as possible, but rather to find a few people who you have real conversations with about the election and about your candidate. So you have time to build up a relationship upon which you then build persuasion. One of the things that makes deep canvassing good is that it's not just a method to get out the vote, it's also a method to persuade. So Jen is talking to a wide variety of voters, and during that time, maybe she contacts 5 people in the same 3 hours that John was doing, but she has an impact on every single voter. So after making her calls, Jen is tired, but she's feeling good about making a difference. She may not be like super enthused to go out there and do it again, but the fact that she knows it matters gets her to continue doing the work. So last, I want you to meet Jess. Jess is doing friends and family canvassing. Every day, she does the same thing. She spends 3 hours making calls, reaching out to people. The difference is that when Jess reaches out to people, she is reaching out to people she knows. She's calling her grandkids. She's calling her brothers and sisters. She's calling her parents if they're still alive. She is making an effort make a difference, but it's through the network of people already in her life. And the big difference for Jen after she does this is, yeah, maybe she only talks to 2 or 3 people on any given day, but she's also enjoying the time she spends catching up with her friends and family and knows that she's having a significant impact. After chatting with loved ones, Jess, unlike the other 2 callers, feels hopeful and energized. She's not dragging. She looks forward to doing this work because it allows her to stay connected and make a difference. So the question then becomes, since friends and family canvassing is obviously the best method, is how can you begin doing this type of work? I know a lot of people initially are intimidated because they're like, well, you know, a lot of the people I know don't support my political beliefs. Or on the other hand, well, everybody I know already is planning to vote the same way I do. So how can I make a difference doing this approach?
And there's also the fact that people like have an agreement. We're not going to talk about politics.
Right. And you're not used to talking about politics. Right. So all of those things go together. And the important thing about doing this kind of work is that you are going to be meeting people where they are, and you're going to be using the methods that David teaches. So this is going to be a pleasant experience, we promise. But first, you need to know how to get started. So step 1 is just make a list of the people in your personal network. And remember to include family, friends, neighbors, colleagues, casual acquaintances. At this point, do not worry about what their political beliefs are or how close your relationships are. Just make a list, and you'll get to that later. The second step in the process, once you've made this list, is to reach out to people and ask each of them 2 questions. And this outreach doesn't have to be in person. It doesn't have to be by phone. It could be by text. It could be by email. It doesn't really matter how you do it. The important thing is just that you get the answers to these 2 questions. So the first question is, how likely is it that you are going to vote? And when you ask that question, you ask them to rate their likelihood on a scale. So you get a real sense, because you don't want a kind of a wishy-washy answer of yeah, I'm going to vote. Instead, you want to get a really good sense of how sure are they that they're going to vote. So you ask them to put it on a scale from 0 to 100%, being 0, absolutely no, not under any conditions am I going to vote. 100%, the only way I'm not going to vote is if I drop dead between now and the election. The second question is, how likely is it that you would vote for whatever the candidate is that you're promoting? So if your candidate is Biden, for example, you would say to the person, how likely is it that if you vote, you would vote for Biden? And again, you ask them to put that on the scale from 0 to 100%. Now, once you have that information, what do you do with it? Well, the first thing is you don't engage at that point. You don't continue that conversation. You end it there, and unless they're really interested in talking, in which case you can continue to some extent. But you want to get strategic first. And that's why step 3 is really important. You're going to chart everyone's answers on a grid to help you set goals and prioritize your efforts. So this is the grid. It shows the answers to the 2 questions. So on the horizontal axis, let me start with the vertical axis. On the vertical axis, you map the likelihood of voting from 0 to 100%. And on the horizontal axis, you put the likelihood of voting for your candidate. Now, instead of having the 2 axes meet at the 0% point, you actually have them intersect at 50%. And that's going to create a 4-quadrant grid that's going to help you decide how to prioritize your efforts. So you'll draw this graph and chart the answers. Now, once you have the graph, once you have all the answers charted, you overlay this graph and use the legend to figure out exactly what kind of goal you are going to set for each person. Now, for the people who are 100% in support of your candidate and 100% likely to vote, which is going to be a lot of people, they're going to end up here in this upper right-hand corner. And you're going to have a very different strategy for the people who are way over on the other side in the upper left-hand corner. Those are the people who are definitely planning to vote, but are absolutely not voting for your candidate. And we're going to go through in just a moment how the strategy differs. But before we do that, I just want to point out that there is a very large white zone on this grid. Now, these are going to be people who are both not supporting your candidate and are not particularly politically engaged. There are people who are like, I don't know if I'm going to vote, but if I were to vote, I wouldn't vote for your candidate. Those people you're not going to worry about. Go ahead and ignore them, because the last thing you want to do with this group is to accidentally activate them to vote against your candidate. All right.
You're not going to ignore them. They're still your friends. But you're still your friend. You can do it for political mobilization.
Right. You're not going to cut them off. You're not going to end your relationship. But for purposes of between now and November 3rd, you are not going to be talking politics with them. After November 3rd, go right ahead and talk politics with them again. As a matter of fact, I would strongly encourage you to do that so that next time they'll be in a different part of that grid. So the activities you are going to take with the various people are ranked from 1 to 7. And I'm going to run through really quickly now what each of these is. So the first activity is to activate. And these are the people in that upper right-hand corner who are just like you. These are people who are absolutely planning to vote and who are absolutely planning to vote for your candidate. But unlike you, these are people who don't plan to do more than vote at this point. They believe in voting, but they aren't they aren't doing what you're doing in terms of going out and trying to make a difference. So these are the first conversations you're going to be having, reaching out to these people to get them on your team and get them activated to do more work. And that could be doing voter contact like you're working on, or it could be something like making donations to campaigns and organizations that are supporting the efforts of your candidate. The next group, also in blue here, but in a much broader area, is the light blue mobilized voters. And this is what we often talk about when we talk about GOTV. These are the voters who are on your side. They are likely to vote, but you're going to move them from probably going to vote to absolutely going to vote. And there are also people who are likely to vote for your candidate, but you want to absolutely lock them in and get them to swear that they are voting for your candidate. And that's in the mobilized category. This also includes a group down the very lightest blue, who are people who are not necessarily likely to vote, but who like your candidate. These are the people who may or may not be registered. And you're also going to have to reach out to them and walk them through the registration process. And David and I will be talking more about how to do that in upcoming presentations.
Yep.
In the fourth category, we start getting into the purples. And the purple area above the 50% mark those are people who are pretty likely to vote, but don't know who they're voting for. And you are then, once you've gone through steps 1 and 3, or priorities 1 through 3, you're going to start focusing in on them and actually doing persuasion work. Believe it or not, you can change minds, especially when people are in this category. The fifth priority is to engage people who don't have a preference. So you've got these voters down here who are either completely undecided or really softly for your candidate, but they just aren't voters. Either they aren't registered, maybe they've never voted, maybe they haven't voted in years, they just don't think about politics much. Before you even try to persuade them, you're just going to try to get them interested in politics enough to start thinking that this is a good idea, get them registered, get them ready to vote. And then once you've moved them into the likely to vote category, then you can start working on persuasion. So what do we do with the people who are pretty strongly against your candidate? Traditional canvassing argues just ignore those people. They don't matter. And you should put all of your time and energy into the other groups. Well, as we already know, we already took care of all those other groups, right? This is your sixth priority. So you've dealt with the persuadables, you've dealt with all of the mobilization and registration. Now it's time to turn your attention to those people who don't like your candidate. Well, you know that it's highly unlikely you're going to be able to convert those voters, right? It's not likely you're going to be able to have a conversation that can switch somebody all the way from supporting Biden to supporting Trump, or from supporting Trump to supporting Biden. It happens. I've seen it happen, but it's hard. But that doesn't mean it's not worth having that conversation. And that's because just like Democrats and conservatives spend a lot of time trying to mobilize their candidates, it's worth spending some time softening support for a candidate as well, so people are less committed to voting for them if they're your opponent. So having a dissuasive conversation can be really valuable if what you're doing is getting the person to think maybe the candidate that they support isn't quite as amazing as they think they are. And if that reduces their likelihood of donating to that campaign, or their likelihood of volunteering for that campaign, that matters. And finally, what about those people in that upper left-hand corner who are absolutely wild about your opponent's candidate? Is there anything that makes it worthwhile? Yes. Most people in our political system are mobilized not by support for their candidate, but by hostility toward the other side. And this gets back to the polarization and tribalism that David was talking about earlier. Most Democrats, if you ask them why they are voting for Biden, will tell you they are voting for Biden because they hate Trump. Most Trump voters will tell you that they are voting for Trump because they hate Democrats. So if you can soften the hostility of the other side toward your side, that can go a long way toward reducing their mobilization. And it's definitely worth having those conversations. It can have an impact. So that gets you through prioritizing your goals. There is one last type of prioritization that's worth considering, which is a lot of us find it easier to talk to people we know well than it is to talk with people we don't know well. So I also advocate within each of these goal categories that you begin by reaching out to close friends and family first, and then gradually work your way out to people you don't know as well. Ultimately, you're going to have the greatest effect on people you know well, so it makes sense to prioritize them. So, in conclusion, to get started yourself with friends and family canvassing, you want to make a list of your friends and family. You want to ask them those two questions. How likely is it that you will vote? And how likely is it that you will vote for my candidate? And get strategic. You want to use the graphs, you want to set goals, and prioritize the order in which you talk with people. So I think what we're moving to now is a role play. Is that right, David?
Yep. What's next?
Fabulous. Okay. I can't see you. I'm going to go ahead and get out of this screen. There we go. Are we good? There. Now I can see you.
All right. I'm no longer the invisible man. Okay, that's fine. Okay. So in the role play, I'm going to be, Karin is doing she's doing the canvassing. I'm her friend. And so they're going to role play on asking me those questions.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. All right. We're gonna be in
and scene.
Hi, David. How are you doing?
All right. How you been doing?
I've been doing okay. I've got a new project I'm working on that I'm actually very excited about. Can I tell you about it?
Sure.
So I think you know that I'm a pretty politically interested and engaged person, and you know that about me. And so as part of getting ready for the election, which as you may or may not know, it's less than 2 months away. So we're talking really close. I'm asking everybody I know 2 questions. So can I ask you?
Sure.
All right. So the first question I have for you is, how likely is it that you are going to vote in the upcoming election? And before you answer, I want you to think about this like on a scale from 0 to 100%, with 0% being you are absolutely not going to vote, and 100% being like there is nothing that can stop you from voting short of like you dying between now and the election. Where would you put yourself on that scale?
I'm probably at 40%. Like
40%. Okay. All right. Excellent. Thank you. And now I have one more question. If you were to vote, how likely is it that you would vote for Donald Trump? Like, let's say on that same scale from 0 to 100%, 0% being absolutely not, you'd rather die than vote for Donald Trump, or 100% being yes, there's nobody else you would even consider voting for. Where are you?
I'm probably I'm close. I'm still trying to sort out. Like, I'm not likely to vote, but I think if I watch these people, there's a lot of advantage either way. I'm probably in the 55% likely to vote for Trump, but but I'm close to 50%.
Okay. All right. So you're still weighing all your options there.
Well, like I said, I'm not likely to vote because I think
I got it.
But I still want to just. But as I think about them, I'm kind of in the middle. But I'm not. Yeah. But voting is such a problem, such a headache. So I'm probably not going to vote. but I'm still sorting out how I feel.
Well, thank you, David, for taking the time to answer those questions. I really appreciate it. I may be back to talk with you a little bit more later. But I know you got to go, but it was great talking to you.
All right. And scene. All right. So anyway, we just did that so that everybody can understand what it looks like to do that. You can see it's not that difficult, it's not that hard, and it's not that invasive. And that is a part of what we're going to teach people to do. So before we move on, I want to thank you so much for that, Karin. What I want to do is I want to make a couple comments that have to do with where this course is and where those different groups of people are. So what we're doing over the next couple of weeks is focusing on persuading non-voters, mobilizing non-voters. So what we're focusing on some level is persuading people who don't want to vote, and we would certainly people who would vote for your candidate but are not likely to vote. You'd want to do that, and some people think that because so many Americans don't vote, I will even try to put some persuasive energy in my friends who would vote for the other candidate. That's an ethical choice you got to make. But what I want to make clear is what we're doing is focusing on persuading non-voters. So not only are we doing that for the next 3 weeks here, but the Voice Project is going to have an online self-paced course focused precisely on that question of how do you mobilize people who are in your personal circle who are not inclined to vote. Now, given voter registration deadlines, we need to get busy on that because in many states, there's a deadline well before the election. But our hope is to try to encourage people to really do that friends and family canvassing, which we call in the project personal network canvassing. Is the same point, which is mobilizing, getting people who are in your circle to change their voting behavior. And the first thing we're going to deal with in this course, and we have one online course about mobilizing non-voters. So the second thing we want to deal with in October, we're going to be doing these through the next 7 weeks, starting, this is number one. Then we're going to shift to the persuasive work, and we're going to use the same method, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, about how you do that. Now, here's what I just want to make sure we put out there. I think it is vital for us to start thinking about healing these rifts in society. And now, these methods that we teach about dialogue we believe them and they're important. My suspicion would be that most of the people listening are on the progressive side. And so I just want to make a brief comment about the importance of engaging with compassion with people on the other side. As Karin said, the people who are progressive are voting against Trump. They don't like Trump. But the people who are conservative or people voting for Trump often are voting against the progressive population. So part of what is in an opportunity is we can heal some of that tribalism by just showing up with conservative people in a different way. So I'll just read you a couple of quotes that illustrate how there's an opportunity in that. So a guy I know who's a conservative, he sent around this long screed. I'll read a little bit of it that basically is about that hostility between conservatives and Trump supporters and other people. And this is what the part of that says. Because you are the ones that are responsible for the rise of Donald Trump. You are the ones who have created this quote unquote monster that you so despise by your very actions, by your refusal to respect your fellow Americans and the things that are important to us. You've made fun of the quote unquote flyover states, the people who cling to their guns and religion, the middle-class factory workers and the coal miners and underprivileged rural populations that you dismissively call yahoos and deplorables. You have mocked our faith and our religion. You have mocked our values and our patriotism. So that's an illustration of that kind of hostility. Now, I'll read you another short quote before we move forward. And this is from Thomas Friedman, who wrote an article in the New York Times last week about the politics of humiliation. It has been obvious ever since Trump first ran for president that many of his core supporters are actually hate the people who hate Trump more than they care about Trump or any particular action he takes, no matter how awful. Many Trump supporters are not attracted to his policies. They're attracted to his attitude, his willingness and evident delight in skewering the people they hate and who they feel look down on them. So here's the point. I would just encourage those folks who are progressive, who do this analysis and know there are people in their circle who are Trump supporters to treat them with respect and compassion, because not only is that good for the nation, it's good even for your electoral goals, because part of what's driving Mr. Trump support is the way that people perceive as having been mistreated by people like you. So it is. So we're going to spend our energy talking about how you engage with compassion, people you want to move on their vote. But I just want to lift up that this compassion-based approach is still vital for anybody, because even if you're trying to defeat Mr. Trump and talk to somebody who supports him, just dealing with those folks with compassion is helping your objective. So that's important to point out. We got 14 minutes left. You want to add any quick comment on that, Karin? Or
no, you said it is better than I could, David.
All right. So let us move forward. So just to be clear, we're going to spend the next couple of weeks talking about persuading non-voters. And then in October, we're going to shift to persuading people on the other side from you. So that's what we'll be talking about. So our sessions after today will be a half hour instead of an hour. And so you are welcome to come back and tell your friends about it, because we're trying to grow this movement of compassion-based engagement. Now, and now we also will have online courses, self-paced video courses that teach these methods. But if you come to this, you'll get a little bit of online live coaching. But if you go to the dialoguecompany.com/voice project, you're going to see our self-paced courses. Okay, what do we teach? We'll teach in those courses something called the REACH method, which I'm going to explain very briefly. REACH is an acronym which we chose because we're trying to reach other people, right, across the divide. It stands for reflect, inquire, British spelling, agree, confess, and harmonize. So we're going to be talking about this in depth over the course of our sessions, but let me just say a little bit about each of those now. Reach means basically calm down and get ready to engage in a different way, right? And so it involves relaxing, it involves rekindling your compassion for somebody, and we're going to give you strategies for doing that. Inquire, British spelling, for asking questions, and basically what you want to do is to elicit a story from people. Again, stories work better than facts, and you want to do so while you're empathizing with them. Agree, you want to let them know that you have some level of alignment with how they feel, at least at the level of values or goals. And you most importantly want to communicate that you accept how they're looking at things. Okay. Confess, you want to tell them a story that basically further builds on connection. You have told them you have some alignment with them, but you want to show it by telling a story. And then harmonize, you want to pull that all together and show that there's a way of integrating their experience, your experience in a larger frame that's helpful to your goals of persuading them to vote, or your goals of persuading them to vote for your candidate. So we're going to go into that in more depth in the upcoming weeks. And again, this same method is mobilized in one way to persuade people to vote, another way to persuade people to vote for your candidate. Okay, what we're going to do is a quick role play. And so for this role play, I'm going to be the person who's doing the canvassing, and Karin is going to play the role of my friend. And so in this role play, as we've set up, so let's imagine that what's happened is in a previous conversation, we've had the conversation where I've done the 2 questions with her, and now I'm circling back. So we're going to move forward. I'm going to try to you'll see a quick version of the REACH method, which really might last over a longer conversation that we can do in this role play, or even multiple conversations, but you'll see the pattern, hopefully. Okay. See, hey, Karin, how you doing?
I'm good, David. It's good to see you. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm good. I want to follow up on that conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago about voting. As you know, I'm kind of so interested in this election. And so you told me that you were not necessarily likely to vote. And so I'm curious to understand, is there an experience that you had that actually influences you to have that kind of attitude toward voting at this point?
Well, I should first say, David, that I haven't always been a non-voter, because when I was younger, I was kind of excited to vote. It was a cool thing, and I thought I could make a difference. But life has gotten busy, and I have kids now, and I work, and it takes a lot of time and energy to vote and get informed, and my sense is that none of my votes in the past made a difference. I don't think they're going to make a difference now. I mean, how many people cast votes in every election? And so it's just not. Honestly, it's not worth it. I have a lot of things going on in my life, and that is not like a high priority.
Yeah, it feels like you can't. If I got it straight, feel like you can't impact the situation, right? And why? Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I hear you. I understand. I understand that feeling. I get that. So then, so given that you're feeling like that, and given that you got to go through all the rigmarole, I understand that way of seeing that. So yeah, it reminds me of a time when I was in grad school, when there was this group that was supposed to help students, the grad students, like a student support group. And I was really wanted a special little caucus of the group to be created for not humanities people, not science people who are in the social sciences, like social change group, like social workers, city planners, etc. And I would come to the meetings and talk about that. And it felt like they wouldn't listen to me at all. No matter what I did, the same outcome would happen. They wouldn't listen.
Yes, I know. That is exactly what it's like.
It doesn't matter. Right.
Nobody listens. Nobody cares.
Exactly. So I found that very frustrating. And so that made me just want to not, I just do my studies and not deal with all that. And I was talking to my mom one time, and my mom was telling me, she said, well, she understood my frustration. She was saying that I'm going to a fancy school. I know other people who feel like me. I might want to join up with them and see if we could together do something. So I started talking to other people and getting other people to come with me to those meetings. And we wrote a couple letters and talked to the dean and complained about the students running that. And you know what happened after about a semester doing that? They decided to create a program for us. It actually made a difference. So so it was really kind of cool that we created a program that was for people in the social change profession. So that was that. I was like, oh, maybe it can make a difference. So, but Karin,
it sounds like your mom was pretty smart.
Well, she was pretty smart. So, so one of the things that I wanted to ask Karin was, what are the issues? I know you don't like to vote. What are the issues that you care about? That the politicians decide.
Well, I'm really worried about this COVID situation. I'm worried about the economy. I don't know if my husband's going to be able to keep his job, and I work for free. So these are on my mind.
Yeah. So one thing we can think about, I got you. I share those same concerns. So one thing we can think about is whether or not what politicians do matters, and whether or not if we join together with other people who are concerned about the same issues, whether we could actually move them to make a difference on these things, and to make a difference on the economy, make a difference on COVID, right? Because what these politicians do matters, and they might need to, I think that if enough people get together and, you got a strong voice, we can be a part of that. Maybe we can influence them to do what they need to be doing.
So, I can follow your leadership on this, David?
Yeah. Okay. Well, sure. Well, I would love for you to follow my leadership. In fact, I'll be happy to talk to you about how you want to, if you want to vote, and what has to happen in your town and those processes, because I think it's so important that everybody get involved. So I'm happy to assist you with that.
You know what? Here's the thing, David. I trust you. I believe in you. And if you say it's worth doing, then I will follow your lead.
Well, I appreciate that because it is so important. I mean, I think we share a lot of same beliefs. And so I appreciate you being willing to do that. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
All right, scene. So that was Karin did great. I did an imperfect job of doing my part because I was supposed to have asked Karin of what issues she cared about early on. That's part of the inquire step. I forgot to do that.
I liked it. I think it worked very well.
So what we're going to teach, what we're teaching the reach method is you want to calm down. You want to find out how they feel and what they care about. You want to that's the inquire step. You want to agree. You want to help them tell you a story about why their attitude toward voting is what it is, and then you want to find a way to agree with it, and then you want to talk about how you've been there at some point, and then also talk about. It doesn't have to be about voting for elections, but you have that feeling, and then talk about how you've moved in some other situation, might be the same or different. You've moved forward to a different situation, and then link it back to what they care about, and then you want to make the ask, because sometimes people will vote if you just ask them to vote in favor of you. So, but we often don't do that. So, we have a few minutes left before our scheduled time. I don't know if we can go after or not, but this is a good time to take a couple questions. We're happy to. My understanding is that there's been a couple questions that are raised, and we'd be happy to address those.
Hi, everyone. Happy to share a few questions from our live viewers. Our first one.
This is Elena, people. She's awesome.
She's amazing. Hi, Elena.
Thank you so much for the information you shared, Karin and David. And thank you for those who are tuning in live who would like to share in the dialogue themselves and learn more about the reach method. Here's our first question from Sharon Guini. Why did you ask about how likely to vote for Trump? This is from your first role play.
Yeah, well, I'm the one who did that. So this presentation is meant to be viewed by both people on the right and the left. So I wanted to demonstrate that you can ask about either candidate, whoever your chosen candidate is. If you're somebody who's promoting Biden, then definitely you would want to ask that question in terms of how likely is it that you will vote for Joe Biden.
But the real issue is to get them on that number line, right? That's the real issue. So if she had asked for Biden, I'd have said 45% instead of 55%. So that's just an artifact that has no major significance. But what you want to do is to find out how you ask. It doesn't matter. You ask it how you feel most comfortable. But the issue is to have them rate themselves on that from 0 to 100.
That is the most important thing. But the reason there is one little variable in there that I think is important, which is I ask in terms of my candidate because rather than the opposing candidate, because I want to know if they are a third party voter. So when you ask in terms of your candidate, you're picking up people who are voting for the opponent and a third party.
Got you. Okay. All right. Well, this is why we have a political psychiatrist in the call, because of the all right. Oh, what's the other question, Elena?
Yes, this is from Nadia. Can you describe how critical engaging non-voters is? In late 80s, early 90s, Mobilizing Non-Voters, Chicago, she's from the Chicago area, I assume, was a massive catalyst that began to reshape politics there.
Okay, let me say a little about that, and then I'm going to get Karin's comments. In the last election, 100 million people didn't vote for the presidential election. 100 million. So part of what is available for both parties is to tap into that. William Barber's effort to mobilize poor people is all about mobilizing people who are not voting. So with 100 million people not voting, either side, if it can get people to register and vote, it can swing the election a whole bunch of places just by a small number of people. So that is why my efforts, even at this late date when registration is closing, is to try to find leaders around this country who are willing to say, not only do we want to impact the election, but we want to teach skills of compassion to do that. And let's remember 2000 and how the whole national election was decided by 500 people in Florida. So my hope is that we can get scores of leaders, religious leaders or otherwise, who can say, I need to put this in front of my people because it's not only good for the election, it's good for people's souls to be more compassionate. And then maybe you can move an election.
Yeah.
We have a few more questions. A quick one from YouTube with Angela. I have people talk rarely. It is weird to just open with voting.
Yeah. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about ways to kind of smooth that transition. We don't really have time in this first session to get into it, but you're right. Learning how to talk politics is an acquired skill. I'll give you one hint that I think is really important up front, which is to be honest and name the awkwardness around it. Say, I know this is kind of weird. We don't usually talk about this, but I think it's really important.
Great. And our last question is coming from Bonnie. I would love to watch a role play or get tips for speaking to activist friends who won't vote for Biden as feminists.
That's good. Yeah. David, do you think we can do that in upcoming trainings?
So we can do that.
We will.
That'll probably be an October thing, because I guess we can think about doing it for even this month, because maybe there's some people, I imagine these are feminists, they're probably not voting. They're probably not gonna. That's more of a persuade them to vote than persuade them to vote differently thing. So
and maybe
we can think. I think we should think about. We can think about.
Yeah, we'll come up with something for you, Bonnie.
Thank you, Bonnie. Yeah. And a couple of other comments. Special thanks to some of our live viewers, Carol, who agreed with you early about the polarization of our society. And we also have a comment from Laura asking if we're recording this. Absolutely, yes. And it will be available on the platforms that you are viewing us, so you can share it and view it later.
And there's even a watch party tonight, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we
talk to your friends and do a watch party.
Yeah. So our goal, just to be clear, I know we're a little past our time. All the content we're putting out in the Voice Project is basically free. So yes, we want to get people activated around this, and we're going to make it very available on the platforms, as Alana said. And every night, every time we do these on Monday, there's a watch party that night, 8:00 Eastern. So I want to just say that. Now, I also want to just say that the methods we're using in the Reach method is related to some other work we do that's on race relations. So the Dialogue Company also has something called the White Ally Toolkit, which is designed to help especially white folks, talk about race to people who look at race very differently. And we even have online courses. In fact, we have an online course that starts this Thursday. It's called Doing My Part as an Anti-Racism Ally, and it's a sequence of 4 sessions that meet for an hour and a half, but there's homework in between. You're on a learning platform with other people, which is, we find, the best way of learning. And so part of what I want to encourage people to do is to check that out. If you go to thedialoguecompany.com, where our online courses, our self-paced courses for the Voice Project will be lodged, there's also a place to go to sign up for Doing My Part. People have told us that it's really transformative, that it not only changes their conversations about race, but the methods that we learn about compassion, listening, and empathy help them with other areas in general. So I would encourage people to think about that. And of course, talking about race is its own specific thing, which is why we have a special course for that. But because election is coming, we also wanted to do something on this, because it's such an important election, and it's important to influence the outcome, and it's important to get ready for the divisiveness we're going to have later. So that's why I wanted to do this.
Thank you so much. So to all of our viewers, please come back each Monday at 12:30 Eastern Time to see these live sessions. In the next 2 Mondays, we will complete our first half, and that is dialogue strategies to mobilize non-voters. And you can continue through October with discussion and learning about strategies to discuss individuals across ideologies and political divide.
I want to thank everybody so much for attending. It's been really fun, and thank you, Karin, and thank you, Elena, and to the people out there, send people to the watch party, because it'll be rebroadcast tonight at 8 p.m. And stay tuned for more and come back.
Great.
Thank you, Dave.
All right,
Bye, everybody.